One morning, planes vanished from the sky, not because of bad weather, nor because of war, but because an entire country finally said, "That's enough." Terminals stood still. Florida's bustling resorts dimmed their lights. Rental cars in Las Vegas sat untouched. So, how did we end up here? Was it a sudden trade dispute? A political retaliation? Or was it something much deeper, decades of growing tension between two of the world's closest allies, finally reaching a boiling point? Canada just halted all flights to the United States, and the consequences are far more severe than they appear. Because this isn't only about air travel, it's about control, economics, and what happens when longtime neighbors decide to walk away. Number 6. Tariff retaliation as the ignition point. This crisis didn't begin at the airports, or even with airplanes. It started with a direct financial blow, a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. Washington called it a calculated move. Ottawa saw it as economic sabotage. So how do you respond when your closest trading partner delivers a direct hit to your economy? Canada responded swiftly. In early 2025, the country initiated sweeping economic countermeasures. The first to go? Air travel. But this wasn't only about metals. These tariffs unleashed something far bigger: mass public outrage, crumbling trust, and a political deadlock that reached every corner of Canada. Over 90% of Canadians supported reducing economic dependence on the U.S. That's not just protest. That's a full-blown movement. And the first major fallout wasn't in the halls of Congress, it was above the clouds. So, what happens when your neighbor locks the door and throws away the key? Keep watching. Number 5. Borders closing, skies emptying. Airports didn't go silent in a single night. Highways didn't go still with just one press conference. But the warning signs were everywhere, if you were paying close attention. One flight got cancelled, then another. Suddenly, travelers heading to Florida were left stranded, and car rentals in border cities like Buffalo sat collecting dust. By the time March 2025 arrived, the pattern was undeniable. Flights between Canada and the U.S. had dropped by over 70%. But here's the kicker: this wasn't just a slump in tourism. It disrupted the everyday lives of millions. What do you do when your annual family vacation to the U.S. suddenly disappears? When your go-to-weekend shopping trip across the border is no longer possible? When a routine business conference turns into a logistical maze? That's exactly what millions of Canadians experienced. Before we dig deeper into the impacts, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button. It's how we continue to bring you deeply researched, eye-opening stories like this one. Your support goes a long way. And trust us, what's coming next will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about North American travel. So, what really caused this massive travel shutdown? It wasn't about safety concerns. It wasn't rising fuel costs. It was fueled by frustration, a political backlash, and a deep, national change in sentiment. After the U.S. enforced aggressive tariffs on Canadian exports, especially steel and aluminum, Canada retaliated in a way that shocked the world. It boycotted travel to America. And this wasn't just a few people canceling their trips. Canadians demanded it. A survey conducted in February 2025 showed that over 90% of Canadians supported reducing their ties with the United States. Major airlines like Air Canada and WestJet cut routes dramatically, while travel agencies reported a 40% drop in bookings to the U.S., almost overnight. The same story played out at the border. By February, Canadian drivers entering the U.S. dropped by nearly 25% year-over-year. That's not a fluctuation, that's a freeze. Entire industries began to feel the chill. Travel agents who once specialized in Disney vacations and shopping sprees in New York suddenly found themselves without calls. Cross-border buses to outlet malls sat unused. In cities like Windsor, Sarnia, and Vancouver, places where U.S. trips are part of daily life, everything seemed a little quieter. But here's what most missed: this wasn't just a tourism issue. It sent shockwaves through real estate, retail, even employment. Canadian snowbirds, retirees who owned property in Florida, started flooding the market. A realtor in Fort Lauderdale reported having 35 listings from Canadians wanting to sell, but not a single new Canadian buyer. Meanwhile, U.S. cities that depend on Canadian tourism, think Las Vegas, Orlando, and Seattle, braced for losses. The United States Travel Association warned that even a 10% decline in Canadian visitors could cost billions. Now imagine a collapse of over 70%. That's not just a dent, that's a crisis. And the trend shows no signs of reversing. Because this isn't just about money anymore. It's about national pride, political protest, and the feeling that things have gone too far to simply go back. So the big question becomes, what happens when one of the tightest international travel relationships suddenly snaps? And more importantly, what if it never fully recovers? Stick with us, because the next chapter in this story reveals just how deep the damage might run. Number 4. U.S. tourism revenue collapses. Picture this. Swaying palm trees, packed hotel pools, and tour buses lined up outside casinos. That used to be the scene, until one country walked away. Now, beaches are half empty. Restaurants are closing early. And business owners in major tourism hubs are asking a frightening question. Where did everyone go? Here's the truth they don't want to admit: Canada left. After the dramatic travel boycott in early 2025, Canadian visitors disappeared from U.S. cities at record levels. And that silence? It's translating into billions of dollars in losses. But before we unpack just how deep this hole goes, hit that subscribe button. It's how we continue bringing you solid, data-driven stories with insights that go way beyond the headlines. Your support makes a real difference. And trust us, what's next will change the way you see North American travel forever. Let's start with Florida, the Sunshine State and a favorite of Canadian snowbirds. In 2024, more than 3 million Canadians traveled there, spending hundreds of millions on hotels, golf courses, entertainment, and yes, even Disney. But by spring 2025, those numbers nosedived. A Quebec-based travel agency reported a staggering 60% drop in Florida bookings by March. Rental cars sat idle. Condo bookings dried up. Even the mighty theme parks, once thought untouchable, started to feel the freeze from the north. Las Vegas followed the same script. A city built for international visitors, especially Canadian weekenders and bachelor parties, began to see whole blocks of hotel rooms left unsold. And the numbers? They're jaw-dropping. The United States Travel Association estimated that just a 10% drop in Canadian tourism could cost over $2 billion. With losses now clocking in at 70 to 75%, the total economic damage could easily surpass $4 billion by the end of 2025. And it's not just numbers, it's livelihoods. Florida and Nevada hotels are slashing employee hours. Tour companies in New York and California are laying off staff. Airlines dependent on U.S.-Canada routes are pulling back. Ground transport businesses, especially in Buffalo, Detroit, and Seattle, are reporting steep passenger declines. But the pain doesn't stop there. In Arizona, small towns built around Canadian retirees, the snowbirds, are in economic panic. Local realtors report dozens of homes being listed by Canadians desperate to exit. The Canadian dollar has vanished from golf courses, pharmacies, and even small-town diners. Now, you might be thinking, can't the U.S. just fill the gap with local or other international tourists? The problem is, Canadians weren't ordinary visitors. They were consistent, high-spending, and long-staying tourists, reliably returning every year. Losing that stability is like knocking out the foundation of a building. Even U.S. policymakers are starting to sound alarms. With tensions still running high and Canadian public support for the boycott showing no signs of fading, there's no easy fix in sight. Which brings us to the real danger. What if this becomes permanent? What if Canadians decide to spend their travel dollars in Europe, at home, or online? What if future generations grow up with no personal connection to American cities? Because at this point, it's no longer about empty hotel rooms. It's about a broken bond, cracked one flight, $1, and one missed vacation at a time. Stay with us, because the next impact zone? It could hit even closer to home. Hit that subscribe button and support us as we dig even deeper in our next segment. Number 3. Canada's economic fallout, airlines, agencies, and real estate tremble. Take a look at a Canadian airport terminal today. Fewer boarding calls, more vacant seats, travel kiosks as silent as libraries. Something profound has shifted, and it began with a decision that most Canadians endorsed, but few fully anticipated would sting this much. When Canada halted all non-essential travel to the U.S. in early 2025, the move was hailed as bold, necessary, and symbolic. But beyond the politics, the financial consequences have been relentless. Want to know how far the cracks go? Let's peel back the layers. But before we do, pause and click that subscribe button. It's the fuel behind the powerful, data-backed stories we share, stories that most news headlines gloss over. We've got more shocking facts coming your way, and you won't want to miss any of it. Now let's take a look at Canada's airline industry. Carriers like Air Canada, WestJet, Flair, and Porter once relied heavily on routes to the United States. Whether it was Toronto to Tampa or Calgary to Phoenix, they operated hundreds of weekly flights serving everything from tourists to trade professionals. But once the boycott took effect, their revenue took a major nosedive. By April 2025, Air Canada reported a staggering 41% decrease in cross-border passenger traffic. WestJet had to suspend multiple U.S.-bound routes altogether. These airlines, once thriving on the steady flow of snowbirds and weekend travelers heading south, are now scaling back operations. Pilots are being assigned fewer routes, and ground staff are being offered early exit packages. And here's the critical part. It's not only the big airlines feeling the pressure. Smaller regional airports, from Halifax to Saskatoon, are bearing the brunt too. These regional hubs depended on U.S.-bound flights to stay afloat. Now, with those routes suspended, they're rapidly losing passengers and the funding that goes with them. The pain doesn't end there. Travel agencies are beginning to crumble. Many of them made a living planning trips to the United States, Disney vacations, Vegas weekends, golf packages in Arizona for retirees. That entire market vanished almost overnight. One Montreal-based agency reported a 75% drop in U.S. travel bookings by March. Another in Vancouver had to let go of half its workforce. And this shift isn't temporary. Canadians aren't just postponing travel, they're completely reimagining it. More people are choosing destinations within Canada, Europe, or the Caribbean. Meanwhile, the long-standing convenience of hopping across the border is disappearing from everyday life. Let's talk real estate next. Every winter, hundreds of thousands of Canadians, often called snowbirds, escape the cold by living part-time in sunny U.S. states like Florida, Arizona, and California. But in 2025, that tradition came to a halt. Thousands of those homes now sit empty, or worse, are being put up for sale. Canadian investors are racing to unload their U.S. properties. A Toronto-based finance firm revealed that inquiries about selling American vacation homes soared over 300% in just 2 months. Why? Because owning property you can't easily visit no longer makes financial sense. But this isn't just about individual owners. It's about a larger economic pullback. As snowbirds offload their U.S. real estate, they're also taking their money with them, spending less on maintenance, local services, gas, and leisure. It's a quiet but powerful economic drain happening on both sides of the border. So, here's the bigger picture. While Canada's travel boycott may have landed a symbolic punch against American policy, it's also forcing Canadians to face a tough economic reality. This movement, which started as a protest, is now reshaping the nation, affecting airlines, job markets, real estate, and the day-to-day routines of millions. What's next? That story is still unfolding. But stay with us, because up next, we dive into what happens when the political bond between two countries begins to unravel at its core. Number 2. Rising political and diplomatic tension. It all began at a press conference, ordinary, uneventful. until a single statement changed everything. One Canadian official, speaking directly to Washington, said something that turned a simmering disagreement into a full-blown standoff. And just like that, flights were grounded, diplomats started pulling out, and both governments assumed a defensive posture. So what triggered all of this? Why has Canada, historically one of America's closest allies, decided to take such a bold and dramatic stand? And more importantly, how far will this go? Before we explore this turning point, hit that subscribe button. That's what enables us to keep producing deeply researched, high-impact content like this. Your support matters, and what you're about to hear will expose a diplomatic firestorm years in the making. Let's rewind to January 2025. The United States imposed sweeping new tariffs on key Canadian exports, targeting technology, agricultural goods, and clean energy sectors. Washington labeled the move a matter of national interest. But to Canadians, it felt like a deliberate betrayal. And here's the kicker: this wasn't an isolated event. Friction between the two nations had been building for years. Disputes over dairy, softwood lumber, pipelines, and environmental policies were no longer confined to quiet negotiations. They were now boiling over in full public view. By February 2025, Canada's parliament had had enough. Lawmakers passed a motion suspending all non-essential flights to the United States. The message? Loud and clear. Things would not continue as usual. This move didn't just startle travelers, it sent shockwaves through North America's political class. U.S. officials demanded a reversal. Canada held its ground. Behind the scenes, private diplomatic talks froze. High-level meetings were postponed indefinitely. Even the annual Canada-U.S. Intergovernmental Conference, once a cornerstone of bilateral unity, was cancelled with no future date announced. But the fallout wasn't limited to politicians. Public sentiment exploded. Social media platforms saw hashtags like #Swadri, #BoycottUSA, and #SIN Take Back Canada surge to the top. A majority of Canadians, especially younger generations, voiced strong support for the boycott, with many viewing the United States not as a partner, but as an adversary. Washington responded with threats of its own. Several U.S. senators called for retaliatory tariffs, re-evaluation of military cooperation, and even suspension of joint energy projects. One lawmaker bluntly called Canada's actions economic warfare disguised as diplomacy. But what's truly troubling lies beneath these surface tensions. For decades, Canada and the United States shared more than trade, they shared trust. People freely crossed borders. Businesses operated on both sides without friction. But now, that mutual understanding is crumbling. A Canadian diplomat, speaking anonymously, described it like this: "We're not just rethinking trade. We're redefining the entire relationship. That's the real danger." Because once political drama becomes policy, and policy becomes public resentment, it's incredibly hard to rebuild bridges. Analysts are already warning that if this standoff continues, we could soon face border slowdowns, blocked ports, stalled environmental efforts, cancelled defense drills, and tighter visa restrictions. This isn't alarmist, it's reality. It's what happens when two neighbors, who once acted like family, begin to treat each other like strangers. And the worst part? Neither side is backing down. Instead, both are doubling down, locked in a cycle of blame and retaliation. So here's the haunting question. What happens when the world's longest peaceful border starts to fracture? Stay with us, because in the final chapter, we'll show how this breakdown is reshaping consumer behavior and rewriting Canadian identity itself. Number 1. Cultural and consumer shifts, the rise of Buy Canadian. Take a stroll through any major supermarket or retail store in Canada today, and you'll spot a quiet revolution. New product labels. Proud signage. A simple but powerful slogan, Buy Canadian. But this isn't just nationalism, it's a full-blown economic movement. Since the flight boycott and political fallout, Canadians have started voting with their wallets. According to a recent Ipsos poll, Nearly 70% of Canadians are now intentionally avoiding American-made products whenever possible. From groceries and clothing to technology and household goods, people are increasingly opting for domestic alternatives, even when they cost more. Retailers are reacting quickly. Made in Canada is now a prime selling point. Local farms and small producers are seeing record demand. Even breweries and music artists are enjoying renewed support from Canadians eager to invest in their own. What began as a protest has become a cultural realignment, a peaceful rebellion fueled by pride and principle. And the message is unmistakable. If America wants to pull away, Canada is more than ready to stand on its own. That's the end of this report, but the conversation is far from over. If you found this story revealing, make sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs to see the full picture behind the headlines. Your support keeps us going, and lets us dig deeper into stories the mainstream often overlooks. Thanks for watching, and don't go anywhere. The next video is going to leave you absolutely stunned.